Today, you're going to hear everything you need to know about Temasek's latest results. I have to be savvy, correct? I cannot be overcritical. After all, this is our national reserve. So I'll be sharing with you what I found out, reading through some of the numbers as well as seeing some of the graphs. And I think there are still learning points. So if you're keen, continue watching on. Hi guys, welcome back. Without further ado, let's dive on to the first point, which is this. The portfolio performance has not factored a large part of this equity decline. Why? Now, I scratched my head also when I realized many people have missed out on the fact. The annual report is from 1st of April 2021 to 31st of March 2022. And if you see the latest one-year returns for it is 5.81%. But again, let me ask you, what is your return from 1st of April 2021 to 31st March 2022? Quite likely you have done quite well also, right? If you look, S&P 500 has done 13.08% in that same period. DBS did a spectacular 22.59%. So it's a period thing. Their accounting has 3 quarters in the preceding year and only 1 quarter of this year. If you think about it, the war started about March. A large part of the decline is going to come in after March only. You go and check out the index, you kind of know already. Which only means that next year's performance might be a bit challenged because right now market has seen a decline already. That will spill into next year's return. So if you're seeing a minus 20% or minus 30% of portfolio and you see gains over here, do note there is a period difference. That leads to point number 2, which is Temasek's portfolio doesn't seem to fluctuate too much in downturns also. If we understand the accounting period, which is from 1st of April to 31st of March, you realize that they also did a negative 2% only in year 2020. However, if you see DBS, which is one of its top holdings, you realize that DBS has declined 28.97% because it caught a large part of the damage in equity markets when COVID-19 was running rampant. So the question is, why is the decline usually so little? And why are the gains not that much? That can be answered in point number 3, which is Temasek has a lot of unlisted assets. How big? More than 200 billion. If you see, unlisted assets form 52% of the total portfolio. A good friend of mine texted me to ask if we could invest a bit like Temasek. Unfortunately, we can't because we can't access unlisted assets. Temasek owns things such as PSA, Singapore Power, Mapletree, as well as a lot of early stage investments. They have bought into many unicorns in its early founding stage. And I guess there are some hits and also there are some misses. But when it comes to unlisted assets, it's recognized as book value less any impairment. So unless it is oil assets where oil plunged to negative during COVID-19, there aren't that many situations of needing big impairments. There's actually a very good Straits Times article. It mentioned that more unlisted assets do not necessarily raise Temasek's risk profile. And from there, I've also came to realize that unlisted assets had an IRR of 16.2% over the last 20 years. That was 2.5x of the listed assets, which clocked in only 6.7% per annum for the last 20 years. That leads to the 4th point for today, which is aiming for 6.7% in your equity investment is actually okay. Now, I've done a previous video that mentioned that if you are targeting 20% per annum, it is very likely unsustainable, or you might be attracted to ideas or schemes that may have untold risk. So 6.7% is actually a fairly decent way to compound your wealth. You can get to financial freedom already with 6.7% over a long enough period. If you're curious whether Temasek has done better or worse than S&P 500, you can just see for the preceding 20 years, S&P 500 did a 5.6% per annum only. It did an almost 3-bagger in the last 20 years, but this number also does not factor in dividends. So perhaps with dividends, it's 6.7% or slightly higher. What about Berkshire Hathaway, owned by Warren Buffett? For the last 20 years, it did a 9.9% per annum excluding any dividends. And Berkshire Hathaway is a good comparison because Berkshire has listed assets, which includes Apple, for example, as well as commodity investments in Chevron and Occidental, but it also has unlisted assets, which includes a railway. But I guess Berkshire doesn't have too many Singapore assets, which is in point number 5. Temasek has a lot of allocation into Singapore and China. If you look at this graph over here, you realize that it is overweight in terms of Asia. Personally, for now, I like this approach. It's something I've shared before on my own allocations. And most recently, Temasek was involved in SIA's rights issue. So that is an example of it investing to national assets. But from what I read, Temasek is getting more exposure globally. It is maintaining its diversification. And that is something to learn. It's currently not invested in too much of big tech in US. Maybe because it's politically challenging, because after all, they are an institution that's linked to government. But having said that, they have been involved in many IPOs in the US tech space. Is it good or bad? That leads to point number 6. Point number 6, the timing for investments for Temasek, in my opinion at least, doesn't seem very spectacular. Let's look at some details together. Just now I mentioned about the accounting period, which is 1st of April to 31st of March. And I've actually done the homework to piece together the investments and divestments versus S&P's return. Because of the accounting period, I drew the blue lines for you to see exactly when they've actually made more investments. You know, when markets are high, we typically hope to have less investments and sold out before the market. But as you can see, they actually did bigger investments, supposedly in the accounting period 2008, which was just before the global financial crisis. Then again, in accounting period 2022, they actually did a significantly bigger investment than divestment. And that was, again, just before this whole market downturn. If we scrutinize for periods whereby they've made more divestments, you realize that the periods don't seem that ideal. In 2009, they actually had more divestments than investments, and that happened to be a period of the global financial crisis. Moving forward to 2015, you realize that they had a small net investment, but in 2018, again, it's a net negative investment in a market downturn. This is a yearly accounting. Hopefully, some of the investments were not sold at the absolute bottom, but rather somewhere in the midst of the downturn. Then the P&L return would be very different. In any case, anything presented here is my opinion, and the team managing the assets in Temasek are definitely very big. If I've missed out on anything, do leave in comment sections, and I can pick up and learn from there also. With that, let's move on to learning point number 7, which is dips are part of the investment journey. Now let's pull up a chart again showing the rolling total shareholder return. You realize that in accounting period 2009, it dipped 30%, and in 2016, it dipped 9%. Before in 2020, it dipped 2%. As I was suggesting, if markets stay tough, 2023's performance might be negative. What we need to understand is when we invest, we can have periods whereby it's minus 30% and then gains of 43% in the subsequent year. Or like in 2016, minus 9% and then the subsequent year gain of 13%. Now when we invest, we cannot compare it against to CPF special account, whereby it gives you 4% year in, year out, and you grow that portfolio consistently every year. In investments, there are periods whereby you lose, but what you want is to tolerate past that period so that when the market turns around, you benefit the most with an upturn. That is why there's this saying, money transfers from the impatient to the patient. And that links also to point number 8, which is when you invest, stay invested. Temasek has shown a great example on investing through difficult periods. Whether they have did more divestments or investments, that is up to anybody's interpretation. But it's quite clearly that they've never fully sold out on all investments. Maybe they can't in any case, but that's besides the point. But they've consistently showed that they reinvest dividends, they add in more capital, and we can see that this graph grows up over time. Now what you want from your own investment journey is not to sell out everything or go net short and speculate the market will go downwards. That is not true. Even if you are bearish like me, you need to stay invested because we really don't know how markets will react a few weeks or a few months down the road. Staying invested and not market timing is the best way to survive. And if you have excess cash flow, regulate how you like to invest a bit deeper, especially when the bear market turns even more aggressive. And that is why I put this last point there, because at this moment, markets are looking a bit ugly. I hope that this whole review has shown some learning lessons and you can sleep a bit better knowing that this is part of the journey that even the best investors have to face. So with that, over to you. Leave your thoughts and comments in the sections below and smash the like button, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care as always, invest safely, goodbye.